Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video called 10 Shocking Realizations Americans Have After Living in Europe. Okay, this looks very eye-opening, so let's check it out and comment, like, and subscribe.
For a year changes everything. From the moment you step off the plane, your perception of life, culture, and even yourself starts to evolve. Americans who take the leap often find themselves surprised by how much their new home differs from what they're used to. Today, we're unveiling the top 10 realizations Americans have after living in Europe. We've scoured the internet, forums, and testimonials to give you an honest summary of what life really looks like for Americans in Europe after a year. No sugarcoating here. We're pulling back the Instagram filter to show you the reality of living abroad. Before we dive into the list, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. 10. Life isn't all about work. For many Americans, one of the first things they notice is how differently Europeans approach work. While the US prides itself on a strong work ethic, with long hours often seen as a badge of honor, Europe takes a very
I think it's crazy to think of like work ethics as just working until you die, but yes, that's usually the case.
Different approach. In most European countries, there's a deep respect for personal time, and it's reflected in both policy and culture. For instance, in countries like Germany and France, labor laws ensure employees get significant time off. It's not just the 4 to 6 weeks of vacation many Europeans enjoy annually. It's also about the mindset. People truly disconnect during their breaks, something that feels almost impossible in the US. For many Americans, even a 1-week vacation comes with the constant urge to check emails or respond to work calls. Beyond vacation time,
it's really sad because it's like, your life revolves around work and it shouldn't be like that.
Europeans also value shorter work hours and more relaxed work environments. In the US, it's common for meetings to start early and drag on late into the evening. But in Europe, many workplaces respect boundaries. This difference extends to the rhythm of daily life.
Boundaries, what a concept.
Lunch breaks in Europe can last an hour or more, allowing people to savor their meals and recharge. Compare this to the US, where a lunch break often means shoveling food at your desk while catching up on emails. For Americans adjusting to this slower pace, it's often a revelation. Some describe it as finally getting permission to breathe. It's not about laziness or doing less. It's about focusing on what truly matters. Quality time with family, hobbies, and simply enjoying life take precedence over the endless grind. 9. Safety feels different. The feeling of safety is another profound change that many Americans notice. For those who come from cities with high crime rates or are used to hearing daily reports of gun violence, the shift is almost immediate. In many European countries, there's a sense of calm that's hard to put into words. Walking down a quiet street at night doesn't feel like a gamble. Attending a festival or a public event doesn't come with the same underlying anxiety about potential violence. This is
Okay, but if you're like that anxious about like going to a festival or like walking down the street, like maybe stay at home.
Especially striking for Americans who grew up in areas where safety was a constant concern. For instance, someone moving from a major US city might describe the first few months in Europe as a period of adjustment, realizing they no longer have to be hyper aware of their surroundings. This isn't to say that Europe is without crime. Petty theft, such as pickpocketing, can be a concern in tourist-heavy areas. However, violent crimes, particularly those involving firearms, are far less common. This stark contrast can
like actual crimes, not that pickpocketing, it's good, but obviously between like being your life being at risk and just like someone stealing your wallet, of course, like there's one's worse than the other for sure.
I feel like stepping into another world. Many Americans describe feeling an unexpected lightness, as though a weight they didn't even realize they were carrying has been lifted. For parents, the sense of safety is particularly meaningful. Allowing children to walk to school or play outside without constant supervision is often seen as a luxury in the US.
Well, yes, and of course you have like the school shootings, like that's a really big part.
Europe, it's the norm. Streets in residential neighborhoods are filled with kids riding bikes, playing soccer, or simply hanging out, activities that might feel risky in certain parts of America. This newfound sense of security,
like without supervision, that seems crazy to me,
often comes as a relief, but it can also spark reflection. Many Americans find themselves wondering why safety feels so unattainable in their home country. While there are no easy answers, the contrast is a powerful reminder of how different societal priorities can shape daily life. 8. Healthcare that doesn't break the bank. One of the biggest shocks for Americans living in Europe is the cost and accessibility of healthcare. In the U.S.,
the cost is nothing.
Even with insurance, medical expenses can quickly spiral out of control. It's not uncommon for people to delay treatment or skip routine checkups entirely because they simply can't afford it. In Europe, the story is very different. Healthcare systems vary from country to country, but the underlying principle remains the same. Care should be affordable and accessible to all. For many Americans, the idea of walking into a doctor's office without worrying about the cost is almost unimaginable. Yet
that's not a thing. That doesn't happen, really.
In Europe, it's the norm. Consider routine visits. In the US, a simple checkup can cost hundreds of dollars, even with insurance. In Europe, these visits are often free or come with a nominal fee. Prescription medications, which can be prohibitively expensive in the States, are heavily subsidized in many European countries. This makes it easier for people to manage chronic conditions or recover from illnesses without financial strain. Emergency care is another area where the differences are stark. In the US, a trip to the ER can lead to bills that stretch into the thousands, even for minor issues. In Europe, emergency treatment is far more affordable, and no one is turned away because they can't pay. This safety net provides a sense of security that many Americans find life-changing. It's not just about the
It's not that you think it's life-changing. It actually is, because we're talking about health and healthcare in general. And of course, like the difference between like getting a regular checkup and catching something earlier, or just like being on an emergency room and, having a life-threatening like emergency, that's literally life-changing. That's really the difference between like dying or just living.
Financial side, though, the healthcare experience itself often feels more personal. Many Americans living in Europe describe doctors who take the time to listen, explain options, and build a rapport. This approach, combined with the financial accessibility, creates a healthcare system that feels less like a business and more like a public service. For Americans, adjusting to this new reality can be eye-opening. It's not uncommon to hear stories of people going to the doctor for the first time in years, simply because they can now afford it. This shift in perspective often leads to a deeper appreciation for the importance of accessible healthcare, not just...
I think that's usually, and I think probably it happens a lot with dentists and probably like also like eye doctors, because they're usually like not included in the, even if you have insurance, they're not included in the health plan. So I think like that's where a lot of people like just like skip regular like appointments. Once you actually get access, it's like, oh, I can go there like for yearly checkups.
Just as a convenience, but as a fundamental part of a well-functioning society. 7. Food feels more real. For many Americans, food in Europe is a game changer. The first bite of a fresh baguette, the taste of ripe produce, or the flavors of artisanal cheeses often sparks a question. Why doesn't food taste like this back home? The answer lies in
Yeah, it tastes a little plasticky sometimes in the US.
Europe's approach to agriculture and food production. In Europe, there's a cultural emphasis on quality and freshness. Small farmers and local markets are a staple in many communities, providing seasonal produce and artisanal goods that haven't traveled thousands of miles to reach your plate. Even in supermarkets, the focus on minimal processing and fewer additives is evident. Many chemicals, preservatives, and genetically modified organisms, GMOs, that are commonplace in the US are banned or strictly regulated in Europe. Dining out highlights these differences even more. Whether it's a tiny trattoria in Italy or a neighborhood bistro in France, meals are often prepared from scratch using fresh ingredients. Even fast food tends to be of higher quality. The emphasis is less on speed and volume and more on flavor and authenticity. Americans living in Europe often marvel at how accessible healthy food is. In the US, eating well often feels like a privilege reserved for those with significant disposable income. Organic and farm-to-table options come at a premium, while highly processed, sugary, and calorie-dense foods are cheaper and more widely available. In Europe, fresh, wholesome food is the norm rather than the exception. The result? Many Americans report feeling healthier and more energized simply because of what they're eating. Over time, their palates adapt, and foods they once craved in the US may start to taste overly processed or artificial. This shift isn't just physical, it's also emotional. The act of savoring a meal, appreciating its origins, and connecting with others over food becomes a source of joy and connection. 6.
Wow, that's nice.
Public transportation is a revelation. If there's one thing Americans living in Europe quickly fall in love with, it's the public transportation systems. Coming from a country where driving is often a necessity, the ease of getting around by train, tram, or bus feels like a luxury. European cities are built with public transit in mind. Metro systems in places like Paris, Berlin, and Madrid are extensive, reliable, and relatively affordable. Regional and high-speed trains connect towns and cities, making it possible to travel across entire countries or even borders without setting foot in a car. For Americans used to long road trips or expensive domestic flights, this interconnectedness is a revelation. The convenience of
course it is. Like the public transport, that's not really a thing in the US unless you're talking about the subway in certain cities, but that's not really a thing.
Public transportation goes beyond practicality. It's also an environmental win. Many Europeans rely on trains and buses not just because they're easy to use, but because they reduce carbon footprints. For Americans, this often sparks reflection on the car-dependent culture of the US, where sprawling suburbs and limited transit options make owning a car almost mandatory. Another surprise for many Americans is how well-maintained and safe public transport systems tend to be. While there are exceptions, the cleanliness, efficiency, and frequency of European trains and buses often surpass expectations. It's not just about getting from point A to point B. It's about doing so comfortably and with minimal stress. For those who embrace this shift, the freedom from car ownership, no gas, no insurance, no parking headaches, is transformative. Walking more, cycling, or hopping on a train fosters a slower, more engaged way of life that many Americans come to cherish.
I think it just depends. Yes, it's more like you see it as a freedom. Yes, because having a car is a responsibility. Although I think they both have their disadvantages and advantages. But I can see where they're going with this.
Multilingualism is the norm. One of the most humbling experiences for Americans in Europe is encountering people who speak multiple languages effortlessly. In many parts of Europe, it's not unusual to meet someone fluent in 3 or 4 languages.
Yeah, of course.
For Americans who often grow up with limited exposure to foreign languages, this can be both inspiring and intimidating. Language education starts early in Europe and is a
you'll feel less. It's like, wow, these people are so smart.
Key part of the school curriculum. Many children grow up learning their native language alongside English, French, German, or Spanish, depending on the region. By the time they reach adulthood, they're often conversational in at least 2 languages, if not more. For Americans living in Europe, this multilingualism highlights gaps in the U.S. education system. While some states emphasize language learning, it's rarely as comprehensive or immersive as in Europe. The result is a stark contrast. While many Europeans can switch seamlessly between languages, most Americans struggle to get beyond basic phrases. But it's not just about speaking multiple languages. It's about the cultural understanding that comes with it. Multilingual Europeans often have a broader perspective on history, politics, and global events, shaped by their ability to consume media and engage with people from different countries. For Americans, this can be both eye-opening and a call to action. Many start learning the local language as a way to integrate and show respect for their host country. Over time, they may even develop a deeper appreciation for the beauty and complexity of language itself. 4. Education feels more accessible. Education in Europe is another area that leaves many Americans in awe. For one, higher education in many European countries is either free or comes with minimal tuition fees. In places like Germany, Norway, and Sweden, international students can even access affordable education options, provided they meet certain criteria. This accessibility is in stark contrast to the US, where student debt is a significant burden for millions. For many Americans living in Europe, the idea that young people can pursue their passions without the looming fear of debt feels revolutionary.
It's unheard of, basically.
Allows students to explore different fields of study or change majors without financial repercussions. But it's not just about universities. Primary and secondary education in Europe often takes a more holistic approach. Students are exposed to arts, music, and languages alongside traditional academic subjects. Vocational training is also more widely accepted and respected, offering pathways for students who prefer hands-on careers. For Americans raising children in Europe, the education system is often a pleasant surprise. Schools emphasize critical thinking, creativity, and global awareness, preparing students.
That's better because you don't want robots. You want people to actually learn. You want kids to actually be able to know how to think and solve issues in a logical way. But I think it all boils down to actually thinking about things and just, not just learning something and just be like, oh yeah, this is what it says. No, let's think about this logically.
Not just for exams, but for life. This well-rounded approach fosters a sense of curiosity and engagement that many American parents find refreshing. 3. A slower, more deliberate pace of life. For many Americans, the fast pace.
I think this goes on with work-life balance and, work. It's not the only thing in your life.
Paced, efficiency-driven culture of the U.S. is second nature. Days are filled with packed schedules, multitasking, and constant connectivity. Moving to Europe, however, can feel like stepping into a different world, one where life flows at a more deliberate pace. Europeans often take time to enjoy the small things. A coffee isn't just a quick caffeine boost. It's It's an opportunity to sit at a cafe, chat with friends, or people watch. Meals are savored rather than rushed, with family dinners lasting hours and lunch breaks often spent at home or with coworkers at a nearby restaurant. This shift in priorities can feel disorienting at first for Americans, but
in
over
a good
time,
way.
It becomes a welcome change. In many European countries, Sundays are still treated as a day of rest. Shops close, streets quiet down, and families come together for long
I'll admit I hate that shops are closed on Sundays. It's like, what happens if I want to go? So I want to go shopping. I don't like this.
meals or outings. It's a stark contrast to the US, where weekends are often packed with errands, sports practices, and social commitments. For Americans adjusting to this slower pace, the experience is both calming and transformative. It's not about doing less, it's about being more present. 2. A new perspective on community and connection. Americans living in Europe often find that community plays a much larger role in daily life. From bustling local markets to lively town squares, there's a sense of togetherness that can feel different from the more individualistic culture of the US. In small towns and big cities alike, Europeans prioritize relationships and social bonds. Neighbors often know each other by name, and it's common to see people gathering at local pubs, cafes, or parks to catch up and share stories.
That's weird to me because I think a lot of countries in Europe are the opposite, and they don't like knowing their neighbors, and they're like, I don't want to know you. So this is quite interesting to me.
Even in urban environments, there's a sense of connection, whether it's the local baker greeting regular customers or a friendly chat with a fellow commuter on the tram. This focus on community extends to how public spaces are designed. In many European cities, parks, squares, and pedestrian zones are intentionally created to encourage interaction and relaxation. Americans often find themselves spending more time outdoors, whether it's joining a community event, picnicking in the park, or simply strolling through historic streets. For those coming from the US, where suburban sprawl and car culture can limit face-to-face interactions, this emphasis on community feels refreshing. It fosters a sense of belonging that many find deeply fulfilling. Over time, this focus on connection can even reshape how Americans approach relationships, encouraging them to slow down and invest more time in the people around them. 1. Gratitude for the US and a bit of culture shock. After a year in Europe, many Americans develop a newfound appreciation for their home country. While there's plenty to admire about European life, living abroad also highlights the unique aspects of American culture that expats might miss. For example, the entrepreneurial spirit in the US is hard to replicate. Many Americans appreciate how their home country encourages innovation and rewards ambition. In Europe, where societal systems prioritize stability and tradition, the concept of dreaming big can sometimes feel less emphasized. At the same time, Americans often experience moments of culture shock when returning home. The sheer size of portions at restaurants, the prevalence of big box stores, and the non-stop consumer advertising can feel overwhelming after a year in Europe. Even something as simple as tipping culture can take time to readjust to, as many Europeans include service charges in their bills. Ultimately, living in Europe doesn't just change how Americans see the world, it changes how they see themselves. The experience fosters personal growth, adaptability, and a broader perspective on what truly matters in life. So there you have it, the top 10 ways Americans feel after living in Europe for a year. It's a journey filled with challenges, surprises, and profound realizations. Living abroad isn't just about exploring a new place, it's about rediscovering yourself and reevaluating your values. What about you? Have you lived abroad or considered making the move? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Your experiences might help someone else make the right decision.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I think I'm still stuck on the whole, on several things. I think the whole, again, the community aspect, I understand what they're going with this of, yes, there's a point of, knowing your neighbors, and I think about, maybe connecting with other people, maybe not just neighbors, but I think probably in general, just sort of, connecting with people. But I don't know if I agree, because, again, I think there are some countries in Europe that I've heard are very close-knit and very closed with or either foreigners or just strangers in general. So they're not going out of their way to actually probably welcome you. I think this is obviously people that move, not specifically tourists, because I think it's a little bit different if someone's staying there for some vacation. So you probably want them to show them a good time. And I think usually people are probably a little bit more, again, welcoming to tourists, just because they want to we want people to actually continue to come here. But if you're actually staying there and you're oh, I'm moving there, but then people I think are a little bit more like, wait, no, we don't want you to move. Like, we just want you to visit. So I think like that's where like a little bit of a barrier comes from. And I think like welcoming tourists, yes, that's nice, you know, if they're good tourists. But in this case, I think I'm a little shocked about this of like, oh yeah, apparently like people are very welcoming, and there's I think people make an effort to actually create connections with them, with the people that are nearby and close by, and not just obviously your friends, because that's a given, like you're gonna be connected with your friends and your family. But I think they're not going the extra mile to actually like get to know new people or form new connections besides the ones that already exist. So that's a little shocking to me. Like, apparently people are so nice. I think it just depends, and I think that it's a thing about, you know, it's hard to actually, and I get it, yes, this is like a very general sort of like viewpoint of Europe, but at the same time I understand Europe, it's huge. Like, there's like so many different cultures, there's so many different countries, that I think obviously a lot of things they're gonna change depending on the country that you're actually referring to. And not even just countries, I think probably cities as well. Like, again, because, you know, a country is huge, and sometimes the culture in one particular city or in a particular set of cities is different from others. So I really do think it's like, yes, I get this is like the wide viewpoint. Not always, it's not always like this, and it's not, again, you can't paint like all Europe with one like brushstroke. But that was interesting to me. I think in the US, I think it just depends on where you're from. I think there are some places and some communities that actually do encourage you, like, again, knowing your neighbors and being all, you know, just welcoming. And I think for you to have a sense of like, if I have a problem, if I have an emergency, I can rely on my neighbors to be like, hey, I have a problem, something, obviously not like a huge problem of like, hey, I am in debt, I need $100,000. No, not that kind of problem, but just like a problem of like, I don't know, I am locked out of my house, or hey, can you, I don't know, there's like or I know my house got flooded, I don't know, whatever. But I think there's a sense in some communities that you can just rely on your neighbors to actually like lend a helping hand, which is good. But I think that doesn't usually happen. Like, obviously it just depends on the city and in the community as well. And obviously it depends on the personality. Some people are just very closed and they're like, I don't want to know you, I don't want to know anything about you. And while others are like super welcoming and super extroverted, and they're like, yeah, they'll join you like with open arms. So I really do think like obviously it just depends. But I do think, especially in recent, I don't know, like probably I want to say the last decade, I don't know, but I think just in recent years, I think this whole sort of like being welcoming and creating a sense of community, I think it's been lost a little, I think, in the shuffle. And I don't think there's like quite much of an emphasis on this. I think that used to be a thing like in a way like before. I know I couldn't actually pinpoint to an actual year or an actual event that actually changed things, but I think in the past, I think there was like this sense of people, I think, were more welcoming in general, and they wanted to create like probably a sense of community for everyone involved. I think in recent years that's been lost a little bit. I think people are just like more close together in general, like they just want to be, they're like shutting down the doors and the shutters in the windows. I don't know, maybe it's the internet. People are a little bit more isolated, and I don't know, but again, I'm blaming the internet. I have no idea if that's the case, but I really do think, because it's something that I've noticed, is that people are a little bit like, they are very closed, and they just do not want to like interact with other people, and that makes them a little bit isolated, and that makes everyone isolated in general. So it is a thing like worth noticing. But again, it just depends. It just depends on a lot of factors. But I do think that people are just a little bit more isolated in general, at least in the US. I don't know how it is in Europe. The whole, like the languages, I think it's quite interesting, because yes, I get it. It's easy to say like, oh, like dumb Americans, they don't really know anything. They just know one language. But it's like, in Europe, like, it's very different. It's common, like the norm is for everyone to know at least 2 or 3 languages. But I think like in that case, I am willing to give like a lot of leeway because to Americans, because I think, not usually, I think it's usually the norm. It's you actually take a second language when you're at school, and it's obviously everyone takes it. not, when you're done with, by the time you graduate, like you're not fluent in this, but or chances are you're not actually going to be fluent in this. But I think languages are quite hard a thing to actually learn and be fluent. Like you need to have a lot of practice, you need to be immersed in this. So it is quite hard to just like, oh, I just took lessons for, in high school and that's that, I'm proficient in this. No, probably that's not really the case. But people know a few basic words. I think in Europe it's going to be different. Not only because they started, I think in the US, there's places that actually start them early as well. I think the main difference is that in Europe, again, because they have, there's like so many countries, but it's easier to just travel from country to country, and probably like if you live near the border, or again, you probably have more contact with people from other nationalities just because it's easier to just like travel back and forth between like different places. And in the US, because it's so big and it's still the same country, it's hard to actually it's a little bit harder probably to interact with people from other nationalities unless you have like a very specific set of circumstances of like, oh, I go to an international school or something. But obviously that's usually not the median American. So I really do believe that that's really where the change comes from. And because Europeans are more used to interacting with people of other nationalities, they are just going to absorb the language a little bit better, and that's how you get them being like fluent in a bunch of languages. And that's not really getting into like, probably it's like mandatory, or again, maybe I think a lot of countries in Europe also have the whole thing of like, oh, there's sort of like the national language, like it's not just one, it's like 2 or 3 languages. So you really do have to learn it. So you have to learn all of them, and then you kind of like take another, say, a 4th language just because you can. So I really do think like that's the difference. And I'm like, I think it's really hard for Americans to actually learn another language or several other languages, just because of the fact that there is just like very big. So you don't really get a lot of contact with people from other places unless you have, again, a very specific set of circumstances. But the medium and the average like American, it's not really like interacting with people from other cultures. And I really, that explains a lot actually. And it's sad, yes, of course, because like they said, it's really good to actually experience other things and realize like how other people live, because that's not going to only open like your own sort of like mindset, and it's going to change a little bit of how you think. It's a good thing, like expanding your mindset. It's always going to be a good thing, and seeing how other cultures like live, it's a good thing. Like that's always good. But I understand it's a little bit harder in the United States, just because, again, for the whole like sheer like greatness of this, like the country is huge. So yes, it's really hard to actually, again, to interact with other people. I think in Europe it's just like it's easy. It's just like, yeah, on the weekend we went to, I don't know, Poland. It's like, yeah, sure. And you constantly like grow up around other cultures or like traveling around, which I think in the US is obviously like not really a thing. So it is a little bit like, yeah, I understand that. And obviously, I guess, all the other things I think are like, obviously are better, like all the healthcare and the educational, there's no debt-free education. The whole like piece of like the you don't have to like grind, and there's like more to life than just work. Obviously those are really good and positive things, but I was surprised like at the end where they were like, the culture shock. I think like you start missing some things where you're like, oh, maybe like the US is better in certain things. It's like, well, I think it just probably just depends, right? Like it just depends on your personality. It just depends on like what you're looking for in life. That it's like, yeah, for instance, the whole, oh, they don't really reward like ambition that much. Like in Europe, I think it's more of, again, like the I don't know if like throughout the European continent, but I really do think there's an emphasis probably in people, like you don't want people to stay now, like you really do go out of your way to be more, to sort of like blend into like society. And it's like the tall poppy syndrome, like they don't really want you to, and I don't think it's seen as a good thing if you want to like, hey, I want to be better. And I think like, or maybe I'm like throwing myself like roses of like, oh, I'm better in this, or at doing this, or I want to be like the greatest. I don't think ambition is seen as a good thing, probably, and probably also as go out of your way of being like, hey, I want to create my own company, or I want to be an entrepreneur. I don't know, like some certain things I don't think are that sense of like individualism. I don't think is seen as a good thing in probably most places in Europe. And in the US, that's encouraged. It's like, no, it's good that you're ambitious and that you feel like you're the greatest and the best, up to a certain point, obviously. But I think like those kind of things are seen as a good thing in the United States, and I think in most European countries are not. And I think again, it just depends like on the balance, because I think in the both extremes are bad. Like if you think, oh no, I have to like blend in completely, and like I there's no need for me to be like better than other people. And of course, like no, I'm talking about like a set of skills, like not as in people in general. People obviously are equal or should be seen as equal, and you're not supposed to think of like, oh, I'm better than everyone else, because you're not. But I think when it comes to like maybe certain skills of like, yes, I'm better than the rest at, I don't know, math, and that's why I want to create my own company. Like though, I would consider that a good thing. It's like, well, yeah, go for it, go create your own company. It's like, yeah, probably in Europe, like that's not going to be seen as a good thing. But I really do think, no, that should be encouraged. Like we should encourage people that are probably better than other people at certain skill, at certain like things or skills. Yeah, of course, because they can like probably improve the world, and maybe they can like make the world a better place. So I really do think like that's probably one of the good things about the US, that's encouraged and that's good. And I can see if you actually are moving to Europe, that could be still like, well, what are you going about? Like that's a bad thing. Like you shouldn't think like that. You shouldn't be that ambitious. And so again, it just depends. But obviously, again, the extreme of like, I'm just better than everyone, and I'm just going to grind and grind and grind until I'm like the best CEO of this company, or I have $1 billion. It's like, well, no, that's a bad thing as well. So I think you have to find like a medium and a medium point between like both of the extremes, and I think that would be better. But I think that I think would be I think like an easier pill to swallow probably in the US than in Europe. And that's just one of the examples, because I think it's really interesting how in Europe, like that's not really seen as a good thing, and in the US, it's like, no, that would be great actually. But that's one of the things that was most intriguing to me, and probably the most like deep in the culture, because I think like something like the tips is like, yeah, well, the tipping culture, I think it's a thing that you have to either get used to or not, and obviously it's a culture shock once you actually get used to one way or the other. But it's more about, well, it's a habit. Like I'll grow out of the habit. But again, the whole like how people see certain things, I think those are like the biggest like culture shocks, both in one way or another. Like you can get reverse culture shock once you move to the US, and you're like, oh my god, like people do things very different now, and of course you're gonna get used to a certain mindset, and others, you're like, well, you know what, I like the better how the Europeans were doing it. And of course that goes to show you, again, it's good to expand your mind and actually make a choice for yourself and be like, how do I feel more comfortable? Do I feel more comfortable in the US, or do I feel more comfortable in Europe? And that's why you actually need to travel and experience like different things. But that was it for today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.